Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss how a few random checks at Dover have highlighted just how vulnerable a hard Brexit, and especially an unchecked hard Brexit, has made us a seriously unsafe food entering the country. A random series of checks took place on lorries entering Dover recently, and almost all of them found dangerously unsafe food intended for the British market. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, as a result of leaving the Single Market and Customs Union, we are now responsible for all customs and standards checks for goods entering the British market. Only we're not doing it. We don't have the staff. We don't have the systems. We don't really have the room. The EU is applying proper customs and standards checks on goods entering their territory because member states bordering the UK spent years putting them in place. We didn't, because our government was trying to pretend that Brexit wouldn't be disruptive. Oh, there'd be no problem. It'll all work normally, don't worry. If they'd spent a fortune actually getting ready for the hard Brexit with all the disruptive works it would have required and all the budgets, everything around our ports, people would have thought, hang on a minute, this looks like quite a big change that's coming here. Even the Kent lorry parks only sprung up on the quiet at the last minute after we'd left the EU and it was too late to do anything about it. But the official government position right now is that we are not even attempting to put standards controls in place. We technically have some customs controls, but we're not carrying out many checks. But we've got nothing at all for standards controls. And not having food standards controls, for example, is dangerous. An operation was carried out about a week ago at Dover, presumably as part of some test to see how much risk we were at as a result of not having standards controls. So inspectors checked 22 lorries carrying food products from Eastern Europe over a 24-hour period, and 21 of the 22 lorries contained illegal imports of food. Some of them very nasty. The issue was raised in Parliament by Brexit-supporting Dover MP Natalie Elphicke, who tried to blame the EU by saying, I quote, "It highlights why it is wrong to outsource our food and biosecurity controls to the EU." Now, I was reading this in the Times, and it was about a week ago, I think, and I saw a comment from someone who latched onto this and surmised that the EU weren't keeping their word about some deal. Oh, it just shows you can't trust the EU to keep their word. And this is important. We do not have a deal with the EU for biosecurity checks for goods entering our country. Doesn't exist. We don't outsource it. That MP was lying. Lying to Parliament, no less. Indeed, how would that even work? Would the Brexiteers want EU inspectors deciding what can and cannot come into Britain? No, of course they wouldn't. EU inspectors check goods entering their own single market according to their standards rules. It's for British inspectors to check goods entering the British market. But we don't have enough of them, so the government said, just don't bother, it's not that big a risk. That's what they actually said. That's what they said. Jacob Rees-Mogg actually told Parliament, it's not that big a risk, not that big a deal. The EU have got high standards, so it's not that big a deal. Now, I'm going to repeat this point again to try and avoid silly comments about, the EU should do this or that. Brexit means we decide what to allow in our country and that it has nothing to do with the EU. If you are arguing that the EU should do something, you are arguing that the EU should decide, not the British government, the EU should decide what is and is not allowed into Britain. If you put it into those terms, no Brexiteer would support that. People may think that the EU should be doing something because this food is originated from EU countries. Indeed, I referenced Jacob Rees-Mogg there, when he tried to say, the EU's got high standards, so it's not that big a deal. The products are not themselves illegal. It's not illegal to have rotting meat. If you go to Tesco and you buy a pork shoulder or something, leave it out in the sun, we sometimes have sun, and it rots, you're not breaking the law. You'd only be breaking the law if you tried to sell it as food to some poor bugger. That's all it's illegal for it to be sold as food. If these suppliers attempted to sell this stuff into the single market, then yes, EU inspectors would have a role to play. But they were for sale in the British market. Nothing to do with them. I mean, that's what Brexiteers are so fond of saying. What we do in Britain is of no concern to the EU. No, it's not, and the EU agree. If we want to import rotten meat or ready-to-eat food with meat juices dripping all over it, and that's what we found in those lorries, we can do that. That's sovereignty, innit? Only, I don't think even flare up the bum guy actually wants to eat a pork pie that's had rotten meat juices dripping on it for days. But this highlights just what happens when you abandon proper border controls. Brexit was a political policy that had zero practical thought behind it. The Tories went for their hard Brexit because it was politically the path of least resistance for them. But it's dangerous. 21 of 22 lorries checked had illegal food products in them. Dangerous food products. Why was it so many? Because we don't check the lorries. This was a one-off just to see how bad the situation was. The government had been working on the principle that because the EU has these standards, it's probably fine. Most of our stuff comes from the EU. There's not that big a risk. Well, do you know what? Turns out it's a huge risk. Unscrupulous merchants have been aware that Britain has no standards controls. If I knew about it, they knew about it. You know, send what you like. The chances of it being found are remote. It's not zero. We do have inspectors, just nowhere near enough. But there have been cases in the past, since we left the single market, of violations being discovered just by chance, purely by chance, because we haven't got a robust system in place for having a good chance of finding these. The bottom line is that criminals exist. They exist everywhere. We should be especially aware of it in this country because we've got a criminal cartel for a government. Those criminals, not the ones in government, the criminals transporting these foods, so to speak, they take a risk-based approach to their activities, just like everyone else. If you've got very few customs checks, you'll get a lot of smuggling, as we do. If you have no standards controls, you are inviting criminals to offload unfit for consumption food onto the British market. Why? Because it's too risky to sell it into the single market because the EU have got a proper inspection system. The risk is way lower in Britain where we don't. So that's where it gets sent. 21 out of 22 lorries checked. And that is because we do not really do checks. Like I say, this was a one-off inspection just to see how bad the situation is. Well, guess what? It's really bad. And there are only two ways to make it better. The first is to apply standards controls up to the level of the EU. To normalise the risk. Make sure that our standards controls are as good as the EU standards controls. But we can't. We don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the staff. We can't get them quickly either. The infrastructure takes time to build. And we've got limited room at our port. So there's going to have to be a lot of inland inspection areas. It takes years. EU countries spent years doing it and they had more room. We also can't get the staff quickly enough. Staff need to be trained. We don't have enough people to train the sheer numbers of new inspectors needed. The second option is to rejoin the single market. If we did that, we would be sharing inspection duties with the rest of the nations in the single market, as used to be the case. That would radically reduce the risk, radically reduce the amount of illegal food entering the country. The first one doesn't seem feasible. The only political party that insists on the hard Brexit is the Conservative Party, in terms of mainstream parties. They are in government and they're doing nothing about it. Well, if the only mainstream hard Brexit party doesn't want to apply proper standards controls when they are actually in government and could do it, it's very unlikely anyone else wants to. So that just leaves rejoining the EU. At the very least, the single market for this issue. So I'll say again, never mind what Labour are saying in terms of the single market. Their policies are of alignment. Their policies move towards rejoining. They just claim they're going to stop short of doing so. That's not how it's going down. Not because I really want to rejoin and I'm a Labour supporter, therefore I think they'll do that. But because there's no other way. There is actually no other way. Only a government that's comfortable with low growth and inflicting an unnecessary healthcare crisis on the country would actually be against rejoining. And consider this. The Tory press might not correct statements by Tory MPs about it somehow being the EU's fault. But they won't do that for a Labour government. If Labour were in government, the same thing happened. The blame would be placed squarely on their heads. The media would demand action. Don't go blaming others. What are you going to do about it? We want urgent action. This is a disgrace. What will the Labour government do about this? What will Keir Starmer do about this? What will Yvette Cooper, who will be the Home Secretary, do about this? and they won't let it go. Of course we're going to rejoin. There's simply no other way. Because this hard Brexit, it isn't a political choice really. A hard Brexit means a severe drop in living standards, no other way, including much lower safety standards for food, regardless of what our laws say, because a law not enforced is no law at all. But people don't want a drop in living standards, so a hard Brexit is impossible to maintain. We're rejoining, it's just a matter of time. But there we are, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.